Doctors of Reddit, what is your how the hell are you even alive right now? Story? I posted this the last time this question was asked. My dad's a doctor, so I asked him. When he was an intern in the someone walked in the front door with a kitchen knife sticking out between his eyes to the handle. The knife went through his sinus cavity and ended with the tip in his throat, millimeters from his brainstem. He goes into surgery and walks out of the ICU the next day. My dad says he is the luckiest man he ever saw. Edit. I figured I'd add some more details. He was stabbed by his mother while she was drunk, and he apparently drove himself to the hospital. OBGYN here. 40-year female with hemoglobin of 2.3. Normal hemoglobin is 12 to 15 for females. Thought it was lab error. It was 2.1 on repeat. Chief complaint, shortness of breath. Bleeding from heavy periods. Transfused, given medication to stop her bleeding. Discharged alive and well. The human body is fascinating. 104-year-old woman with a history of type 2 diabetes. Her diabetes is uncontrolled to say the least. 80 units of insulin daily, a long-acting oral antidiabetic, medically managed diet, the works. We take her BG 6 times a day and would get numbers in the 700s and down to the 40s. Other day she was walking to get breakfast and suddenly became very unsteady. Yes, she was still ambulatory at 104, slurring her words, facial drooping. Then she became unresponsive. Took her BG and it was in the 900s. We call out on anything above 450. Medics came and she came to while they were putting her on the stretcher. Turns out she also had a massive stroke to boot. She seemed unfazed that she was apparently an X-Men and gave the hospital staff hell because they made her miss her breakfast. That time I examined a girl's ocular fundus and found that she had both of her optic nerves grotesquely swollen. I told her she had a brain tumor. She got a CT scan done and there it was, a brain tumor the size of a softball. I don't know how could she still be alive. We had a 7-year-old boy came in with acute painless loss of vision in his right eye. An MRI of his head and neck were performed which showed a complete occlusion of his right internal carotid artery. This artery is extremely important and provides up to 30% of blood to the brain overall and usually up to 80% for right hemisphere. We are all freaking out looking at this image while the kid is playing operation and saying his blurriness is getting better. Turns out the kid just had amazing collateral circulation and was able to compensate one of the brain's major arteries completely shutting down without any deficit/stroke or impairments besides what is hopefully a temporary insult to his retina. Our theory is he got an artery dissection while riding a roller coaster on Six Flags which eventually just collapsed leading to a small hemorrhage making its way up to the ophthalmic artery. Absolutely amazing from a neuro nerd perspective. Guy came in after a motorcycle accident, head trauma, multiple broken bones, was intubated and in a coma. Eventually he is transferred out to another facility. I thought he would be a vegetable for the rest of his life or die. I ran into him a few weeks later at another hospital. He was awake and talking. Didn't make very much sense, but it was a huge improvement. It made my day. Homeless guy came in for surgery. He had rectal cancer. We started surgery and then had to stop because it metastasized to his bone, unresectable. During recovery he becomes agitated and starts hallucinating. Turns out he is in alcohol withdrawal. We had him on Ativan for over a week before he pulled through. I don't know how much he was drinking a day, but it must have been a ton. How did his liver hold up? A month later I see him panning for money on the street. This was after he refused further treatment. He should be dead, but some homeless people are immortal. This one guy comes into the hospital with severe pneumonia. He looks terrible. He is cachectic, super sickly, skinny, weak and stinks. I know he either has HIV or cancer. I'm banking on HIV. Turns out I'm right. He has pneumocystis pneumonia and a CD4 count less than 10. We nurse him back to health, and he berates us the entire time. Threatens lawsuits because he wants to leave. Total nightmare. Somehow he lived and he left. Then he is back a week later with blood in his stool. Take a look and he also has rectal cancer due to HPV. Last I checked he was still alive and getting treatment. All of this could have been avoided if he just got on some HIV meds. I'm pretty impressed he survived the pneumonia. He is still the angriest patient I have ever met. Patient had major artery blockage. Placed 3 stents. Doesn't come to follow-ups for half a year. Decided to stop taking his blood thinners after the hospital prescription ran out approximately 2 weeks. He was supposed to be on it a year. He only came back because he was getting chest pain again. Because he narrowed his stents with clots. And mind you, he didn't go to the hospital. No private doctor's office I work in. My dad is a heart surgeon, and he told me this story. Guy comes in during his residency with a bullet in his heart. Pretty tricky for a new resident, but he successfully gets the bullet out and saves the guy. Fast forward 10-15 years. Same guy comes in again with a bullet in his heart. Dad gets the bullet out and repairs the wound. Guy lives again. Dad jokingly suggests he try not to get shot again. The patient tells my dad, "Tell that to my wife." Not a doctor, but it happened to me. I was at uni years ago when I felt a slight pinch. Thought it was a trapped nerve from sitting too long, so I got up and had a walk around. Fast forward 2 weeks and I've been getting short of breath at uni since then. A fellow student tells me I should really go to the hospital, and that's when I found out I'd been going to university for 2 weeks with a collapsed lung. I'm a CNA and a medtech, and the story is my father, when diagnosed with T1 diabetes, dad's blood sugar was over 900. He drove himself into the hospital, more or less fine with his sugar taken into consideration, just complaining of not feeling well. Doctor came in, explained as he shot dad up with insulin and scheduled blood work and stuff for his kidneys, and said, "Mr. Cat's dad, you're the best looking dead man I've ever seen." Similarly, when daddy tanked a few years ago, sugar at 9, yes. 9 pulse ox in the low 70s. He lived on O2 now, recently diagnosed with stage 1 lung cancer, gave it the finger, and it's shrunk. He rolled an at 22 intimidation, I figure. The average human has around 8 pints of blood in their system. My uncle is not an average human. He was 6'5", built like a brick wall. He passed out, ambulance took him to the hospital. Turns out he had a nasty ulcer that had been bleeding into his stomach for who knows how long. It took them 4 hours to get a blood transfusion going. Not because he had a rare blood type or anything like that, but because they estimate he had less than 2 pints of blood left in his veins, and they had to keep pumping him full of saline to keep his blood vessels open long enough to get some blood, any blood, into him. Not a doctor, but currently in my last year of medical school, so I've spent a good part of the past year in the hospital. It's a government-run hospital, so it's like a dumping ground for patients. We had a patient who came in at the ER in the middle of the night with a diaper on. When they opened it, they saw her intestines in it. Apparently she had a hemorrhoid that she messed around with a knife, and ended up having her intestines come out of her anus. We've had a suicide attempt hanging. Patient was referred from a smaller hospital. They said he was awake with stable vital signs, but patient arrived unconscious with generalized tonic-clonic seizures and the anesthesia team had a hard time intubating him. We sent him home eventually, alive and well. Recently I had a patient who apparently wasn't with known comorbids. Patient has had on and off leg pain for months, but only came in because his toe came off while wearing his pajamas. Patient was really septic, all lab tests were abnormal, and he was delirious and hypertensive. He's still alive today. We had to cut off his leg though. I've had a few patients with deranged serum potassium levels. Normal serum potassium is 3.525. 0 mx/L. Below 3.0 you'd be feeling cramps. Below 2.0 you'd have irregular heartbeats and problems with breathing. I had a patient recently with osteomyelitis. Serum potassium was 1.89. Patient was feeling perfectly fine and the only complaint was the pain on his heel at the site of infection. There's probably more, if I really think about it. This woman. She was under the care of her daughter, with advanced dementia, plus is slow of heart and lung DX, including pneumonia and due to recurring swallowing problems with a PEG tube. Her daughter, who BTW was missing a few neurons herself, came back from whatever, and found her mother down, unknown time. EMS called. Not breathing, no heartbeat, but was able to shock her back into life. Spent some time in acute hospital, not responding and on life support. Transferred to our facility, and in our ICU, started waking up, weaned off ventilator, pleasantly babbling and trying to climb out of bed. Speech therapist caught daughter feeding mom a turkey sandwich. Education again as to why mom can't have food by mouth. Daughter, but she gets so hungry. Guy tried to kill himself by repeatedly stabbing himself in the abdomen. Came in 3 days later, had pics with timestamps to prove he didn't have an infection and missed all bowel and organs. Something a doctor told my father when we his family were there to witness it. My dad had few minor heart attacks, but every time he got to the ER they had already passed. Third or fourth attack was noticed, and he was sent to the ICU immediately. They took all the tests and a shadow scan, don't know what that is called in English, SRY. So the next day we went to see him, and doctor comes by and asks, can I be honest? And father said sure. How can you still be alive? On the shadow scan we found that your main aorta vein is blocked 100%, secondary is 95%, third one is 90%, fourth is only 70% and fifth is 65% blocked. Surgery is day after tomorrow, right after you have stabilized enough. Good day. We were so shocked that we just stood there for 5 minutes or something like that. This happened almost 15 years ago. Doc gave father 10 years after bypass surgery, and he is still going strong. D. Not me, but my aunt had a detached placenta during her pregnancy and started bleeding so much that you could hear the blood splashing on the ground. She wanted to take a shower before going to the hospital, but my uncle dragged her straight to the ER and she delivered. Doctors told them that in that kind of cases, the usuallys, that either the mom, the child or both will die, and here both survived. Not a doctor, but I had a friend who was experiencing several abdominal pain and didn't realize that he had a burst appendix. Neither did his doctor. The doctor, thinking it was some other kind of issue, prescribed super strong antibiotics to my friend, who then went about his business for another 2 weeks with a ruptured appendix. Funnily, the misprescribed antibiotics were the only thing keeping him alive during that time. Eventually, my friend fainted, was taken to the ER, and was opened up like a Thanksgiving turkey, so the surgeon and his team were able to hose out the mess in his abdomen. Had a patient with a chronic skull defect, i.e. no skull, where your forehead is, that looked like it would hold a baseball. Few years later, patient was still alive, and due to the chronic infection that eroded the base of the skull, you could see out of the patient's nose when looking into the defect from above, as well as the brain pulsating behind the defect. Another patient, I actually saw maggots living on the brain. And of course, the patient was doing fine. My husband, years ago working a rural hospital, a young man walked in who had used a small caliber pistol to shoot straight into his mouth, attempting suicide. He left a finger of brain matter on the pillow after transfer. Found out a few weeks later from family that part, who had been very difficult to deal with, was well and really chill. Seems he gave himself a lobotomy. He's damned lucky. Not so much shouldn't be alive, but definitely WTF how. I grew up with absolutely hellacious periods. We are talking bleeding heavily for 2 to 3 weeks straight, anemic, weak, no tampon lasts an hour, just horrible. Multiple doctors shrugged me off and said that's not that bad for years. For perspective's sake, I started my period when I was 14. I'm almost 28 and this was just addressed 2 years ago. So at 26, one doctor is absolutely mortified that I've assumed 2-week-long periods with the flow capacity of a fire hydrant and enough pain to make a grown man with her is normal. We start trying to figure out what's wrong. At that point, I tried every birth control imaginable, and at best they made the flow less catastrophic. I wouldn't pass out, but I still lost a lot of blood. But even that was starting to fail. Then the pain amped up. Holy mother of God, I will never forget that pain, nor do I ever want to know it again. I drove myself to the ER easily at a 10, if we are to scale the pain again. Perspective. I walked off a broken elbow and self-splinted it. I have the pain tolerance of an ox. They determine I had a massive cyst rupture and fill my abdomen with blood. Cysts become pretty routine, but never as bad as that first one. My IUD decides it's over this sheet and bursts through my uterus. They scrape her out, put a new one in, and run a bunch of tests. Turns out I'm extremely allergic to dissolvable sutures. The incisions swell up, stop healing, and my entire body is covered in hives. They put me on gnarly steroids to calm my immune system down. I catch the flu as a result and end up really sick. The results come back. Everything is negative. We still have no idea what's wrong with me, but now my periods are pretty chill on the blood loss, but the pain is still there in rare form. Super weird. Sucks ass. I fear another cyst rupturing. There's still so much we don't know about our bodies. Not a doctor, but this happened to me. I have Crohn's disease, and there was a span of time I was getting really high fevers randomly along with abdominal pain. Nothing new for Crohn's. But this one time I was feeling really dizzy too. So went to the ER. Found that my blood pressure was something around 50/30ish and the doctor was wondering how I was talking to him. I was immediately put in a trauma room in case I crashed. I ended up being extremely dehydrated. My potassium, sodium, etc were all out of whack. I also ended up having sepsis. Was in the hospital for about a month. Had to go home on 4th antibiotics. Fun times. My issue was a gallbladder that exploded. I was waiting for an OR surgeon to be available. After being admitted through the ER, my BP dropped to 50s over 40s, or so I was told. I went unconscious. Husband was with me, and he ran into the hallway saying I needed a doctor. Nurse told him later. He yelled now. With enough force to get a resident's attention. Full-on septic shock, multiple fourths installed while I was being pumped full of multiple antibiotics, emergency transfer to the ICU, etc. The only reason I'm alive is my husband noticed when I went unconscious, notified the right parties immediately, and my hospital, large teaching hospital, had a solid plan for septic shock. I eventually woke up, but with serious memory issues and aphasia. I lost the ability to speak. Absolutely terrifying. They couldn't even address the gallbladder for another day because of the shock. It took me months to regain most of my concentration ability. Oh, and I did get another bonus, a C. diff infection that took almost 3 months to clear. Fun times. I did get not die dupes.